We have returned to the second half of this first class on Chidabhasa, and might as well say Vivarta too. We'll look at that in a minute. A little slightly different connotation. Chidabhasa reflected consciousness of Brahman in everything, and Vivarta kind of pointing straight to the false superimposition of name over form, name and form over formlessness rather. And so a little bit starker warning here and a little bit more of a concession here for those of us who hold that ideal that God is here in some way. Vedanta would be very tentative about that statement, and because we're sentimentalizing everything and emotionalizing everything and ego marking everything and calling everything God but God. And it's the same with love. Real love is very hard to find here, exemplified in a great being, like say from Ram to Krishna to Ramakrishna in the present age. It's very rare to find a person who loves for the sake of love and who loves God for the sake of that love. And so all sorts of other things masquerading over in the meantime. Some of them not so objectionable, like dharma and goodness and good acts and that kind of thing, and other things, of course, a lot more objectionable. Coming in train as consciousness does reflect into its various tattvas. The consciousness itself are those beings, that the intelligence of those beings, and intelligence is one of those words that is very big in India, like Lord Buddha using buddhi, Buddha, calling himself Buddha, the awakened intelligence, is a very significant and meaningful name to give himself, as if everything else went away except that intelligence. And that's what's here, basically. Vivekananda has, and funny you should mention it in terms of Buddhism, because some Buddhist schools have said that will comes first and intelligence comes after it. And we're talking about Brahman, and then how somehow the Mahat comes out of Brahman, or the word, see. So when that happens, what comes first? What quality do we see first? Some people have opined that it's, well, will, it's done by will, God's will or something. Vivekananda said, no, that doesn't make sense. It happens that knowledge is the first compound. I mean, if you have a compound off of the original, then it's the first admixture. So you have Brahman, which is pure consciousness, and then you have its first compound, which is knowledge, or wisdom, if you will, or intelligence. Knowledge, when we say that word, doesn't carry a lot of weight, because we have all sorts of knowledge around here, and knowledge of everything from soup to nuts, as they say. And our libraries are full of different kinds of knowledge and different secular topics and mediocre topics and intellectual topics and technical topics, and but the knowledge of the seers, we'd have to shift to a word like wisdom, or something that consciousness, high awareness, higher intelligence would have to find its way into that definition. So in this case then, with Vivekananda talking about the first compound, would be the first thing out the gate, I like to say. Like if you have a horse race, who's the first one out the gate? It's probably Seabiscuit or someone, So first thing out the gate is going to be knowledge. So he says here, though knowledge, being a compound, cannot be the absolute, it is the nearest approach to it, and higher than desire, will, conscious or unconscious. The divine first becomes the mixture of knowledge, then in the second degree, that of will. So he's making that point about knowledge, or what I'm calling here intelligence. And that would follow in scheme with this chart we looked at, where when you come out of here, then you have this intelligence, or buddhi, it's called here. Cosmic intelligence comes very near the top. And if you were to bring will into the picture, of course, there's the Divine Mother's will. But that's, of course, not will in the usual sense of the term. That might be Brahman's own power, Shakti, as Sri Ramakrishna has said. But Vivekananda then follows these kinds of sayings up with sayings like this, which really kind of loosen all doubts. He says, the only knowledge that is of any value is to know that all this is humbug. But few, very few, will ever know this. Quote, know the Atman alone and give up all other vain words. Unquote. This is the only knowledge we gain from all this knocking about the universe. So knock into this thing, knock into that thing, mosquitoes colliding in dense gases, cars colliding on the freeway. And we're having, intellects colliding with each other in debate. Whatever it is, it's all a kind of knocking about the universe, and just vanity and vexation of spirit, as the old saying goes. So he's saying, give up all other vain words and thoughts and just concentrate on your Atman, on this pure conscious awareness, or Brahman. And then see how it's reflected after that. Because you can't, as my teacher said, you can't get to the infinite through the finite. So if we did believe there was an infinite, which most of us don't, because he says very, very few know that, but if we did believe there was an infinite, a samadhi to reach, a nirvana to have, a satori to experience, then we would try and reach it through the finite. And we would find that those roads don't lead there. You'd have to give up the finite to realize the infinite, not try and move through the finite to get to the infinite. How many lifetimes will it take you to do that if you tried it the other way? Krama mukti is based on that. That I get a little knowledge this lifetime, I get a little bit more spirituality, a little more attainment, and hopefully Maya doesn't come along and rob me, as Krishna says in the Gita, that Maya will rob a person of his discriminative wisdom along the way somewhere. So you have to be very careful that you envision the infinite as the infinite and take it as the reality and make that conclusion. That's Siddhanta. If you can do that, then you can proceed through principles like Chidabhasa or Vivarta, because this is more the monastic school, and I'd say Chidabhasa is more the Vedic school of thinking on how to reach the infinite after having amassed your awareness around it. Chidabhasa, there's another word, Chidgana. Chidgana means a mass of awareness, an infinite mass of pure conscious awareness, boundless, borderless, infinite, pure light, intense, intense concentration without any conceptualization. Thank you. I was trying to recall that, which goes back here to the ego and mind. It is full of conceptualization, which is why one of the things that limits it. So that's a nice quote I wanted to throw right in the middle of this chart, because we run the risk even in studying the Dharma of getting off the track of non-duality. It's funny, it's the only thing that will get us out of Maya, because we can't just pull ourselves up and out of Maya unless we've probably had a realized lifetime before. So we do have to take to something like Dharma or like knowledge, the second compound, in order to get to the absolute. But as we take to this, we have to make sure not to delimit it or not to use it as a false superimposition. And the ego is very good at doing that. It can call it my knowledge just as quick as that. And all of a sudden you wake up one day and it says, what happened to Mother's knowledge? What happened to God's knowledge? What happened to Brahma Gyan? The ego's saying, it's mine now, it's mine. See? You don't have it anymore, it's mine. So with those kinds of careful ways of proceeding, great qualified non-dualistic words like Chidabhasa and Vivarta guide us. They are words of power. And we don't have anything like them. I mean, we don't even have anything like Akasha and Prana in English, as I was saying. Those are medium grade tattvas. I mean, to become aware of the prana would be to become aware of my breathing and become aware of psychic prana that moves my thought. Become aware of all movement, the source of all movement, and then you could find out that there is no movement. How are you going to find out that Brahman doesn't move if you don't begin to move on some higher level to see it, see that it's not moving, you see? I mean, are you stationary enough to do that yet? You can see the stationary Brahman? No, so you move, so oh, I moved, oh, it's not moving, you see? There it is, an insight. All of a sudden I moved in my consciousness and I saw Brahman, and I stopped moving again. See, so I was aware all of a sudden that there was a witness to it, and that the ego wasn't it. And all of a sudden then, next move I said, I think when I see it this time I'll identify with it, and the ego dies. See? So you get the idea of that, and it's very subtle dynamics in that very high meditation that the qualified adept will affect in order to reach that final state of non-dual awareness, Advaita. Well, there's one other quote here, and that was one I mentioned earlier in the first half, because this is, you can see here the chart is really, this hand is coming out of the tree bough, as if our own consciousness is coming out through the nature that we created. See, we created the tree from our thought, then we became the tree, got into the tree, and consciousness is at the very root of the tree. So there's that hand coming out of the tree, and there's Divine Mother here, very subtly put, she's smiling, looking down upon the water and the fish, with this water fountain, ethereal water fountain coming out, and the 7-chakrad meditator here. And so this whole process is another way of saying that consciousness is working its way down from the subtle ethers into the grossest ether, like water. And so all of this has to do with our own consciousness coming through nature, which we created. Nature didn't create by itself, and God didn't create it. That's kind of what you could draw the conclusion here. Two things you'd have to say that are laws not to transgress. Nature cannot create itself, like from a Big Bang. There had to be something that caused the Big Bang, if you follow that idea. And then also God did not create it either. It came out of the mind. And it came out of a big mind because of everything that's in it. I remember even in high school in the West, sometimes we wanted to impress someone, one of our friends would say, what about God's mind? You know, we didn't have the foggiest idea of what we were talking about yet, but we had that idea that there was a cosmic mind somewhere, a great mind. And so that would intrigue us, you know, and later on we'd look into it, hopefully, like having an Om sign on your wall in the 60s, but not knowing what it meant at all. Not knowing how to connect it, and where, you know, that it meant non-origination, and it meant your 4 stages of consciousness and everything else. And that it was the very first principle. It was that intelligence through which Brahman expressed itself. So all these things had to become later when we reviewed the wisdom that was where? Already within us. So, all education is a manifestation of the knowledge already within us, Vivekananda would say. So he has great quotes like this. I put one more up here with the plants, as we had that one with the water and the fish and so forth. With the plants, he says, it is said that plants have no consciousness, that they are best only unconscious wills. The answer is that even this unconscious plant will is a manifestation of consciousness, not of the plant, but of the cosmos, the Mahat of Samkhya philosophy. So he's taking us all the way back to the earliest system, 24 cosmic principles, and pointing us to the Mahat. And the rest of the charts I have up here today and next week are all about the Mahat. We want to look at this great mind. And since it is the first move, you might say, its intelligence and knowledge is the first move, first compound out of Brahman, then it must be a very, very rarefied kind of intelligence that, if you meditated on it, would allow for your transcendence. You would just lift up off of everything, all of this, and get back right, you know, to your close to your divine nature, like you get to the Father through the Son. So that Son for us would be that Lord Brahma. See, that cosmic mind, or Mahat. So that's jumping from the very foundational to the very elevated, I know, but to finish this off, we see how When I fashioned this chart yesterday, after thinking about it in dream and in waking over days, this is how it came together, and how to try and express that, yes, there is Brahman in nature, as it were, because nature has come out of the great mind, which is in Brahman, and but how to be very careful not to compromise or even distort or, like I say, transgress the laws that Brahman is nameless, formless, timeless, deathless, baseless, and every other less that's on this chart of tattvas. Elementless, senseless. Take them all and put a less in front of it, and you've got more, you see. So that's how to give credence to everything you see around you on the physical, the bur loka, the physical level, but at the same time not get caught in the transmigratory process, like Tulsidas complains about. He says, Tulasidas kaha kara jori, Tulasidas kaha kara jori, Bhavasagara para utaroji, Bhavasagara para utaroji, Bhavasagara para utaroji, Bhavasagara para utaroji, Bhavasagara para utaroji. Itani vinati raghunandana se. He says, "Oh Lord, can't you see Tulsidas praying to you with folded hands? Please take me swiftly to the distant shore of blissful transcendence beyond the ocean of delusion, where this transmigratory existence is experienced again in seemingly endless cycles." So he's spat out the body and the five senses and the five elements and the dream state and everything all the way up to the highest, but he did so by knowing everything. First he knew it was only a reflection of Brahman, and second he knew the sense was a reflection, it wasn't ultimately real, and that he could not build his house on sand. His home was eternally set in stone. And so this is the full cycle of the transmigrating soul who comes to full realization, and maybe for the last time. He will wear the body for the last time. Who said that? Lord Buddha. That soul who does that will wear the body for the last time, like Lord Buddha did. So we have different expressions like that in song that we like to sing to illustrate this. Well, then let's look at the Mahat, I guess, in the time remaining. Now that we've looked at Chidabhasa, we should look at Vivarta closely. Let's look at that. We'll have more on the Mahat probably next month. But I would say that probably one of our very our very favorite stories of Sri Ramakrishna was told to us by Swami Damodaranandaji Maharaj, who gave up his body into the Ganges River some months ago. He was very old and he was on crutches and so forth. So one night he just committed it to the sacred river. And we knew him very well through his times in Fiji and South America. Fiji and Australia. And went to visit him several times, and went to India and saw him later in life too. I saw him once more before he took that walk out to the river at 2 in the morning to cast off the body, as we just said, spit out the body. And he used to tell us some stories of Sri Ramakrishna that weren't in the gospel. We'd gather around him sometimes at Bellarmont and when he was there. And this was one of them he told. Just as the morning sun reflects its light in the many dewdrops that settle on fields and flowers at dawn, so too does the one indivisible Brahman shine its light of pure awareness through the world's many objects, such as plants, animals, human bodies, all without losing its homogeneous nature in the least. So we're back there to this chart, and how Sri Ramakrishna, who was sitting one morning just as the sun came up with one of his devotees, and there were dewdrops sparkling all the grasses, you see. And so the man asked him, how, I don't understand how Brahman manifests, how the one becomes the many, like that. So wasn't probably really aware of Chidabhasa or of Vivarta. Maybe had heard about them, but hadn't really lodged in his intellect deep enough yet to understand how all of this happens, to get the teachings of the Dharma, and to go deeper and meditate on them and understand the dynamics of it all. Not just on the level of one's own karma and one's own freedom, but on the level of how everything comes out of the Mahat and manifests itself. Knowledge that's not in our cultures anymore, not even in Indian culture much anymore, is this kingdom of heaven within idea. Last time we heard it mentioned very much outside of India was probably with Jesus. So, or maybe the jeweled palaces of the heavens of Allah, by Muhammad. So it just gets mentioned once in a while, but we never understand it, we never meditate on it, and we don't connect it to the source. We connect the source to matter, or to some place up in the sky on a planet. So we're just totally bereft of this knowledge of the subtle body, and knowledge of the causal body. We have a gross body, but we have a subtle and a causal body too, and we're not tracing the signs of the gross body out here to the connections of the subtle body in there, waking to dreaming, if you will, or tree to the thought tree, or clay cup to the thought clay cup. We're not doing that as if it were the source of it. See? And so that we could find the next effect to that cause, or the next cause to that effect. And doing a cause and effect train like that in our thinking till we get real knowledge, which is the second compound, or the first compound, the second after Brahman, and then, intelligence comes. So he's sitting there, and this man is asking him, I don't understand how the one becomes the many. And Sri Ramakrishna probably just had this epiphany and looked out and said, oh, well, you see all those dewdrops sparkling out there? And the one sun in the sky? They're all taking on the light of Brahman. See? All those dewdrops are sparkling with the light of Brahman, with the light of the one sun. That's how everything becomes many. So it's a simple metaphor right there in nature. And you'd have to assign some significance to that. You'd have to have the kind of mind that would go looking for the meaning to that. Otherwise, you're just sitting there looking, look at the pretty fireflies in the air, or look at the lake shimmer, or look at the sunset, or look at the dewdrops sparkling, and you have nothing deeper to say or to think than that. It's not actually an example. Brahman's not actually trying to tell you how it reflects through nature, and then maybe get you off of nature if you're so attached to it or so obsessed with it, or suffering because of it. The 6 transformations, including disease and everything, you're going to go running to the doctor and not to the seer. So one of the most beautiful stories for simplicity of it all is just how the sun reflects in dewdrops, and that's just simple metaphor or simile, how Brahman reflects in everything. And those dewdrops could be human bodies. See, but he says here, plants, animals, and human bodies. So he's talking about more sentient level of tattvas, not the less sentient. Prana, we know that has a light to it. Psychic prana, a great light to it. It's carrying light, so it takes on the light as it carries it. See, you almost can't tell the difference sometimes between intelligence and prana, because one is carrying the other. So it's like the carrier and the carried become one thing. You can tell them apart, like Vishnu and Garuda. So some of those things are very, very open, susceptible to taking on the light of consciousness. But when you get to insects, plants, and animals down here, then you're talking about, back to Swami Sheshananda's saying in that chart, you see, if it reflects off of a rock poorly and leaf better and a lake better. So in that way, you see how these kinds of analogies are part and parcel of the Indian way of thinking, Vedic and Tantric and Yogic and Samkhya way of thinking, and Buddhist and Jain too. This is like something long ago concluded and set in stone, and then you set your compass by it if you take on more births. If you come into another yuga or another Mahayuga, you come into it with this quintessential knowledge. Never leave home without it, you see. And then you can play and sport all you want. Like Ramakrishna used to say, if the child holds on to the pole, swings around the recess, he's fine. But if he loses his grip, falls down, skins his knees, goes running home to mother crying. So you have to keep a hold of that pole as you spin around. So that pole would be those axioms or those principles of non-dual awareness and qualified non-dual teachings, and how you work them out in dualism, in the dual world, with 2 eyes and 5 elements and multifarious things. Those things would be all would define you as a transmigrating soul, and would qualify you to end transmigratory life. Qualify yourself and then put an end, stop to it. And there's no reason why you can't, because you started it. It's like this fight between you and Maya. You started it. No, you started it. Well, you're going to win that argument. Maya's going to throw up his hand and say, all right, you started it. See, I did. It's up to you. I'm yours. I'm in you. Well, just to show some of the other principles, that some of them were on this chart here. You can see here in this Vivarta chart that there's the sun in the sky, and we're calling that Brahma Jyoti. See, Brahma Jyoti, the light of awareness. There's hardly another principle such as light that is so apropos for describing Brahman. The light of intelligence, the light of bliss. Sound would be another one, but probably more people are vision-oriented than they are hearing-oriented. So the mystics will hear things and follow Om and so forth and hear those kinds of things. But the visionaries will be more on the outward with the light, you see, and they'll transfer that inward to the next level of inner light and so forth. The light in dreams and the light in deep sleep, and finally the light of consciousness. So that's shining on everything. You can see the dewdrops here, which I found an image for in accord with Sri Ramakrishna's wonderful story. All these little dewdrops here, and there's the Mahat at the very top. See, that's got to be the first thing out the gate if we're talking about pure intelligence. Well, maybe not pure intelligence, but compounded consciousness that is intelligence, knowledge, wisdom. So we will look at the Mahat next week in several different charts I have to show you that outlines some of its facets more thoroughly. Almost one with it, or hardly different, is the Trinity. And of course that's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, which is why we haven't sung this for a while, so we should. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Eva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So the Guru is the great teacher. The teacher is Lord Brahma, is Lord Vishnu, is Lord Shiva. And that's one with Brahman. So the Trinity is that, one with the light of awareness. And so you could almost put them side by side, call them almost the same thing. Remember, I also gave you that word, Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic egg. Sometimes in the earlier times, they looked at Brahman, the first offshoot or compound of pure conscious awareness, as Hiranyagarbha, this cosmic egg. And that follows a little bit more the tantric way of thinking, because inside the bindu, you see, is kind of like this circle, and everything is contained in there, right at the third eye. And there are many, many different teachings, deep teachings about that in Tantra. But you can see Ishvara coming close in line with all this. So all of these are on the upper branch of this dew-colored tree. And those would be the three most remarkable expressions of Brahman. And of course they wouldn't be in the physical universe, but we would look for them to reflect in the physical universe too, wouldn't we? Like Ishvara would reflect as Ram and Krishna and Ramakrishna and Chaitanya and Shiva and so forth. And great souls would be reflections of those avatars and shine with a great light that the world could not dim. I used to talk about Swami Vivekananda like that. He shined with a great light that the world's darkness could not dim in any measure. Sometimes there's one Upanishad written on Sri Ramakrishna now, a new Upanishad about the great master. And it says, oh, nature could never form Sri Ramakrishna. So when you saw his body, the idea was that you weren't really seeing a physical body at all. It hardly touched the ground. And like the great Homa bird, it lays its egg in the sky, but the egg never touches the ground. It hatches before it hits the ground and flies up to its mother. So those kinds of ideas are there in these traditions, and even in contemporary with Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna, talking about a light that can't be dimmed and a cosmic form that can't be formed by nature. So it comes from the Mahat, and Ishvara is that manifestation, and we look to that to be an expression of Brahman in the universe, in the three worlds, the higher of the three worlds. And that's the Son, you get to the Father through, and so forth. Or later in time, the Buddha comes, and it's that emanation. And in different traditions, we have those, whether they're called avatars or prophets or messengers or saints or seers or Ishvara Kotis and Avadutas and so forth. So those three are of particular mention on the Vivarta chart. Now, there's another word there, adhyasa, ashtitva. So that's another word in Sanskrit that is very much like Vivarta. Remember, false superimposition, you probably can't put too much energy or emphasis on the word false. It's not that anything is false in the equation in the way we think of false. It's just that the superimposition is temporarily clouding the reality. Like the quote we just had here is that in the nature chart where Swamiji says that it doesn't change Brahman whatsoever when it appears as a insect or a fish or a plant or an animal or a man, that it takes on that form doesn't change Brahman at all. This is a mistake people don't make, or that they make when they try and find fault with that idea of false superimpositions. They think that they believe in transformation. So if they believed in non-transformation, a parinama, then they wouldn't make that mistake. Because you have to own up to the fact that Brahman is transformationless, does not change. It's pure and perfect, and there's nothing you can do to change that. You can't change the changeless. And everything that's changing is Maya around it. It's the pillar, and everything else is revolving around it in its different orbits on different levels of the whole projection of Brahman, a projection of Mahat, I should say. So in that regard, then, you're having this realization of the changeless nature of Brahman. Then you come to Vivarta or Chidabhasa, and you say, oh, I see how it's taking on the thing but not changing. Like a magician can take on something on stage, or an actor can take on something on stage but not change himself. Sri Ramakrishna used to say one man left home and he played 4 different parts in the play that night, but he went home and his kids saw him just as the father again. See? So Brahman, puts on these things as an act, but does it mean it has to, even when it plays its part so well, to appear as different tattvas? Does it mean that it's stained by those tattvas? Sri Ramakrishna used to say, air is stained by good and bad smells, but ether is not. So, things that change and pass across the air, nice smell, foul odor, the air is taking on these attributes, but ether won't take them on. So that's Brahman, a metaphor for Brahman. So a lot to say actually about this, but let's save the bulk of it for next week when I show you these other nice charts about the Mahat. Especially this one about Lord Brahma, it's very good, that we haven't taken very often. And also a few others I'll have to show you. But in the meantime, let's go down the chart and look at the next less refined tattvas. There's manas. What's manas? Mind, yeah. And at this level, we'd probably say we're talking about individual minds, but let's just include in the scope, since it doesn't really cover it here, the collective mind too. Vyasti and samasti. Let's say that for the sake of all of this, to fill it in nicely, is that our individual minds here on earth are not enough to explain the equation, because we do have ancestors. And we have families, and those seem to be repeating. Whether or not we can trace our ego from one to the other, is a matter for our own spiritual evolution. If we can see the ego living again and again, we may want to truncate it, or stop it, or attenuate it, or purify it, put it behind the scenes and bring the divine ego forward. All of that is part of our spiritual evolution. But as far as accounting for everything that's in the Chidabhasa system and everything that gets covered by it, by Vivarta, we have to probably include in here that we have families and children, and before our families and mothers were our grandfathers, and before them were their ancestors. And that's going to make up a whole cross-section called the collective mind. So Mahat's the cosmic mind, and all these other minds are the collective mind, might call the subtle mind, subtle body, and then you get to the individual minds only down here. The collective minds are rather like individual minds, but they have a much larger scope when they leave the body to see things. And I've told you before, I think that in the kingdoms of heaven you feel very free, and you feel free from the physical, and you feel less limited, so you're able to do things in the kingdoms of heaven like dreams that you can't do here on earth. And it gives you a much freer feeling, and therefore a much wider scope to see inwards towards the light. You know that you're operating by some light. So the ancestors know, probably from the light of the celestials, that they're operating by a higher light. And the celestials know, probably from the light of the gods and goddesses, we call deities, that they're also operating on a higher light, and a higher fuel, as it were. And then, of course, the gods and goddesses would be looking back toward the Trinity, because they're manifestations of that light. So this whole pantheon of goddesses and gods that India proposes is not just a kind of dualistic or fundamentalist mess. It really points to the fact of false superimposition of everything over form in many gradated levels. Wouldn't you believe that if you looked out here and saw how much everything was gradated? Earth is graded, striated mountains with different levels due to time, different kinds of trees, different kinds of variations, different levels of intelligence, and even different strata of ignorance. So if this realm is that variegated and that multidimensional, then why wouldn't the kingdoms of heaven inside be even more so? So it's something that's not of the strictly non-dual teaching, but it's filler in between that's important. That's why I've taught from it a lot, not just don't just stick to the non-duality, because I've seen some teachers do that, it's left a lot to be desired. That's pun intended too. I say that. You're missing a lot of tattvas. You're missing how your soul got here and how it's going to get back. Because are you the kind of soul that has the wherewithal just to give up the body and unite with Brahman, or come out of Brahman and take a body, without going through any of these ancestors or any of these gods and goddesses? So, if you are that kind of soul, then we come here, we'll bow to you. But in the greater percentage of beings, that's not the case. So, this whole gradated level that is very well illustrated by principles like Chidabhasa and very well cautioned against by Vivarta or Ashtitva, Ajasa Ashtitva, is showing up right there in the manas. And you see, out of the manas comes the universe and living beings. And that was well illustrated here as we worked our way down into the lower levels of the waterfall, as we say. And there's the ego self, one of those two drops. And of course, when we say manas and universe there, we would not make the mistake of saying just the physical universe. We're always talking about the three worlds in our tradition, and the three bodies that go with them. That's an advantage we have as thinkers and knowers of wisdom and dharma when we come to these systems of India, is that the three worlds are immediately posited as, for you to explore. The kingdoms of heaven within are those. And you also have three bodies that go with them. And you can call them waking, dreaming, and deep sleep if you want. And let the exploration begin. Why should I stay just on the outer world with one body when everything in my nature is crying out to express itself back inwardly? And it's getting stymied here outwardly so often. And that's what causes people frustration and not being able to fulfill themselves or their desires. Not just that desires can't be fulfilled with objects, it's that there's so many ways in the way of trying to fulfill yourself with objects. I mean, there are examples of kings coming to the end of their lifetime and getting everything they want. Kings, kingdoms, queens, children, riches, and then that's their last lifetime, India says. It's the great Rajas, their last lifetime. They've had it all, and they don't want to come back. Of course, there are other kinds of kings who, don't get that satiation. So you're going to want to be one of those beings that, if that's the destiny of your lifetime, then you're going to want to come, bring that all full circle. And teachings like fault superimposition will sort of will kill your final taste for it. Vivekananda said, the shine is off it now. End of his life. He said, well, first I got into this work, and I was really into coming to the West and, trying to get the West to help the East and, sharing the Dharma with the West and doing all these things, and I was really into that. He said, but now the shine's off it. So when I read his letters and where he said that, and I understood that, that there'll come a time when you just don't want to invest in it anymore, and you've seen through it, and I think if that's a mature seeing through, and not an immature seeing through, then something like Chidabhasa will appeal to you, and seeing God in everything, and how some souls get to it straight away. Vivarta is a path of neti that gets you to it very quickly, and so you must have had some sort of look at it from your dream state or from deep sleep or from waking to say that, oh, the shine's off it now. I'm not really attracted to much of it anymore. And I want the quick release. I want to be able to go inside, and if you have no venue or no wherewithal to go inside, then you're caught out here in nature. That would be the predicament of the Western society and culture in this day and time. They're not teaching you anything except backwards in time or up in space, see. But inward hasn't been explained to you yet. And although you've been coming in and out for lifetimes with your ancestors, they don't know it. I mean, false superimposition is a wool over your eyes. It's a wool over everyone's eyes. And they may know something about it once they lose the body and find themselves back in the kingdoms of heaven. Oh boy, what a dream I had. I think I'll go back there and try that again. And then as soon as they get back there, they forget where they came from. It's like a kind of spiritual amnesia that the ancestors possess. And in other cases, it's an on-purpose forgetfulness that just wants to cover the eyes on purpose so they can just sport and play with unreal things and never get satisfied. That's the rub on it. Well, it never really fully satisfies me. Why am I playing? It's sort of like Sri Ramakrishna saying, you know, girls get rid of their dolls, and they throw them away and they get husbands later. So you want to go on to the real thing and quit playing with red toys. So all of that here in regard to the ego self and what its machinations are, how it goes through this various lifetimes and what it prefers and what it becomes averse to. And there may be perversion and aversion might have a higher train. There might be the great perversion, which is to Maya, and the great aversion. You know. So you want to have this absolute affection and love for your true nature. Like Tantra says, I saw my own true nature and I began to worship it. See, I found that it was the darling of my own love. The soul was the darling of my own affections. It's like Vivekananda saying, I've looked all over all the worlds and everything, but I'm a Vedantist. I can scarcely find anything else as grand as my own self. So if you've seen the self, or the Atman, not the Anatman, that's ego. If you've seen the Atman, and as he said back here, see, and you give up all other words, and just see that alone, then you find out what's the use of knocking about this universe with many bodies. And the shine is off it, and you come to a state. And that state can even be Jivan Mukta. You can even be in the body and have that state. That's the beautiful thing about this tradition, is that there are beings who have lost a shine and remained for the good of others. Like Shankara, for instance, passed at 32 years of age, after knowing everything that he knew from the time he was 8, when he recalled it all. And you know, why do you still do this? Why do you still do that? And he said, because so that other people will follow me. I took a guru so other people will follow me. You know, and I studied the scriptures so that other people would follow me. I took a body so that other people would follow me and get liberated. I worshiped my guru slippers so other people would follow me. So they come back to help others and be examples for the highest realization. So they will still stay around for a while, although he wasn't one of those that stayed around that long. Vivekananda, again, only till he was 38 years old. As we work our way here, then, we have ego, universe, and living beings. I've sort of put these in little pockets that associate with one another. The tattvas themselves, you know, if there's 24 of them, starting with the Mahat, and coming down to Buddhi and mind, and then the 4 sets of 5, then you've got the 24 right there. And actually that's what's in this chart, which we will look at when we examine the Mahat next week. It's an old warhorse, but we want to make sure that we know what falls under the regime and the whole business, the cosmic business of the Mahat. So we'll look at that. But those 24 tattvas. It's not a closure on the book, because Shaivism came along and saw Lord Copula's system and added 12 more. So now you've got 36 tattvas, and those are the 12 inner steps that have to do with things like Ishvara and so forth. Those are higher tattvas that weren't accounted for by Copula, because he was just wanting to get people to know about their own cosmic package there, their own individual mind and so forth, and their five senses and the five elements and how they all connected. Evidently in his time there was some disconnect going on too. And he wanted to leave that behind for posterity. Yeah, posterity. So you see there the tattvas, 24 of them if you want to look at them. There's the prana showing up as we looked at over here. Not just a sort of energy that makes grass grow and rivers flow, but has a much deeper level to that, all the way into our mind, which Vivekananda called us the psychic prana. What moves our thoughts is prana. And probably nobody ever thinks about that. Why are my thoughts moving, you see? Well, there goes one. But you kind of have to slow it down and become witness of the mind. You can see this energy that's coursing your thoughts along, and I think the smarter, more wise and intellectual people have kind of got a handle on that, so they can direct them then. See, because thoughts are random. Well, I have a good idea, and oh, that's the bad idea, and good idea and no follow through or whatever. But the wiser people have got the psychic prana going in a flow, and then they start to meld it into one stream and direct it. Concentration, dharana in yoga. And that leads you to meditation, dhyan. So psychic prana, that would be one of the advantages to studying how your thoughts move. Another one would be, why am I coming out of the three states of awareness all the time? I mean, you could call deep sleep, dreaming, and waking, you could call them death, life, and birth, couldn't you? Waking is birth, and dreaming is life, and then death is deep sleep. So why am I doing this all the time? Another question would be, why am I doing this not knowing why I'm doing it? Or that I am doing it even. You're putting yourself behind the eight ball further and further when you think like that. I mean, if you don't think like that. So basically, you're thinking, about coming in and out of that kind of three levels of awareness is like like I often say, your in-breath, your held breath, and your out-breath is reminding you of that all the time. So whenever you check in on your breathing, you must think, oh, I see, that's my three states of awareness, and I'm doing that continually, and I've got lungs, and I live by that, but I don't live by that alone. And pretty soon all signs of movement, like I said, can be measured up against non-movement, or the desire for non-movement. That's a high desire, is to be stationary, to be still. You must have noticed them sitting in the woods or on a mountain or something, and just bringing it all closed, you see, shutting it all down. 49 days into the poetry, or 12 days and 12 nights out in the wilderness, or whatever it is, just stopping it. And because that's where peace is, and that's where bliss is, and that's where light is, and that's where Brahman or God or Allah is. And you need to check in with that, especially if you're in this process. You should be checking in what's called meditation and contemplation and so forth. So prana is a very big one. I have probably a good 5 or 10 charts on prana alone from different aspects to bring it back into Western consciousness, because I said, as Vivekananda mentioned, we don't know anything about prana here in the West, and we don't know anything about tanmatras. Those are subtle elements, like in your dream tonight. Or if you don't want to bring it into the dream scope, where the gross elements came from are the subtle elements. Solidity, the rock came from the idea of solidity, so you have to connect the two. There's an idea that gave rise to the object, a thought. Like everything came from a thought. And Mahat has the biggest thought of all when it first posits the universe in space and time. So all those things are to be espied by you and accepted, smiled at. It makes you noble, makes you peaceful, makes you wise, and free of fear and doubt for all time. It's the only way to really do that effectively. And it can be done quickly with something like Vedanta in 1880. You have to make conclusions, though. So there's prana and there's the tanmatras just mentioned. I would say, if I could just make a quick observation about Western psychotherapy and so forth and what we're being told, is that because we don't know the tanmatras, then our dreams are just dreams. We don't know that our dreams are the kingdoms of heaven within, and that we can go there with our consciousness intact, and we can talk to our ancestors, and we can have visions of Ishvara. We can trace ourselves to our true home. We can see the gods and goddesses inside of us as our own powers. And all of that's not possible because we haven't been taught about the tanmatras, that this is the 5 elements in a subtle state inside of us. And somehow we forgot that all of this didn't come from that. And from the infinite, the finite has come. And even if it's still finite out there, it's infinite in mass. And it came from the infinite power of the Mahat to think things into being, and you followed that trail yourself, and you can think so many things at your own will. They can be positive things. They can be all positive if you want. And no negative. Look into your mind and see what you're brooding about. What's negative? And just X that out. It's your mind, you can do it. But you might have to have, the prana under your control to do that. Because if you don't have the prana, then you can't X out those negativities. So pranas and tanmatras, huge, huge, huge. 5 akashas, huge, that there's more than one space. So India is constantly telling us, in this day and age, if you look into the ancient teachings, it has the solutions for all our problems and all our shortcomings. And it may be on the philosophical level, but that's where you need to encounter it. Religion must be tested by philosophy. And since it hasn't been in this day and time, that's why religion has fallen. And it's not doing its job. It's become narrow and fundamentalist and just obsessed with, who owned what tent peg in what generation in some faraway land. Going on for pages about that, scriptures that do that. So, these are the real teachings that man you up and make a god out of a man and a goddess out of a woman, and then transcend those, become the divinity, one with the divine. I and my Father are one, or Aham Brahmasmi, I am that Brahman. So those things all lead to that. That's the ultimate goal, and it's to be done by realization through a practice, through a method. And how do they say it? Nourished and kept constant over long periods of time. See? Cultivated over a long period of time. That's one lifetime. Might as well say that one long period of time is one lifetime. Shouldn't take you more than 6 months, Vivekananda said, but he's probably talking about some of his monk brothers he saw, who were probably, if not fully realized, partially realized when they came in to their bodies under Sri Ramakrishna in that time. So some important things about tattvas, prana, and tanmatras. You might say all 3 of these things are insentient. They're tattvas. So this is prana is the one that looks more sentient, no doubt. And as it gets physic prana, like I said, it becomes one with the carrier, with what's carried. So it looks very sentient, but it's intelligence that's riding on prana. That's the first compound out the gate. And that intelligence is precious, and that's Brahmagyan. And that's what's going to turn into everything else. And you have to recognize that that's what happened. Oh, I see, that's my own knowledge. It's not that far a jump to say, well, the architect made the house or the woodworker made the furniture. That just came out of his mind, didn't it? So why is it so hard to think that the whole idea of both came out of the cosmic mind? That all of that is just a thought made manifest, but a higher thought at a subtler level. You fashioned the couch in your dream state out of 5 subtle tanmatras. You sit there with a chisel and some wood projects in your dream and made a couch, you see, or a lamp. And came out here and did it on Earth. So I'll do it out here. A lot harder here. Can do it very easily and quickly in a dream state. But the idea is to connect them. Now, the last here, in our remaining few minutes, it's good that we got actually 3 charts to look at in this first class. I'm happy with that. Is these 5 elements and 5 senses. Now, those, of course, are the bottom rung of the ladder when you're talking about something like the 24 cosmic principles. You see it, there's the wisdom senses, the tanmatras themselves we'll look at, and the 5 active senses and the five elements, 5 gross elements. So all of those are a package of 20, all connected. And it's a great study to connect them. It's a reminder to yourself of how all of these came out of each other, how everything came in order out in this process. And so that you know you can get out of the process by reversing the order. Sancharaha prati sancharaha, Lord Kapila says, who's the father of that system. There's a chain of evolutes out. Oh, guess what? There's a reverse chain of evolutes back in. See, we're never given that in science. It's out, we don't know where we came from, and we're stuck. See? And that's all. We're just born and die in nature. And there's no soul. And intelligence developed after the brain came into being, and all this backward stuff. See? So you have to be thinking at an entirely different level. And India and Dharma will afford you all of those systems, as these two will show you. We've gone through a lot of Dharmic teachings over 25 or 30 years. We've all been together. And they just keep coming at us. And we repeat them every year or two so that we make sure and remind the mind that this is our own inner wisdom. And it's where we should be headed when we reflect, when we contemplate, when we meditate, until form goes away. And we've, formlessness isn't getting in the way anymore. Because you go into meditation and some form will get in the way, isn't it? They say about meditation that the worst thing that gets in the way when you're about to get it realized is the ego. That's the tattva that gets in the way. I am meditating, or, some thought comes along, you're just about ready to, on the brink of that experience that you've been striving for so long, all of a sudden the I ruins it. So you want to ripen that critter really fast, and you do so by reverse chain of evolutes, because the ego's attached to something in those. That's why it's coming back. It's attached to something in those things, or several things, and you want to make sure you X those out as you go along. And make sure that your path is smooth and paved and clear of all impediments. So, as Krishna says in the Gita, you can just return to your source, like taking off clothes and putting on a new set of clothes. And you can also be reborn in that same clarity as a Jivan Mukta, like my teacher was always speaking about. May peace and bliss be upon him. So here, I think, with the final, well, let's read this final quote, and then we've run out of time. This quote here is just one light shining, all shines by its light, all else is made radiant. That's just borrowing from the great mantra, Om Bhur Bhuva, na Tatra Suryavati, na Chandra Tarakam, not the light of the sun or light of the moon or light of fire or of lightning, but that one light of Atman shines. Everything else shines after it. Another way of saying that in terms of light, consciousness is the first light, and then every other light all the way down to the billion suns in the nocturnal sky is a manifestation of that light on different levels, Brahman expressing through a billion suns. And then the final quote here by the Master, Brahman is qualified by the universe and its living beings. At the beginning, while following the method of not this, one has to eliminate the universe and its living beings. But as long as I-consciousness remains, one cannot but feel that it is God himself who has become everything. He alone has become the 24 cosmic principles. A nice end with the Master saying to everything we've been saying about Brahman reflecting in higher tattvas all the way down to the 5 elements. He himself has become all of this. So we say that, careful not to breach the Advaitic laws that he was so aware of, that Brahman is never a form, and never caught in time and space, and is beyond all the tattvas as the sentient principle that oversees them all. So here, let's end with a chant. Om Sato Ma Sadgamoya Tamaso Ma Joytir Gamoya Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamaya Abhira Bhira Mayeti Rudrayate Dakshina Mukam Denamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om